You ever notice how some people can sit in complete silence and just be fine with it, like genuinely comfortable with nothing happening at all? No background noise, no podcast, no second screen, just sitting there with their own thoughts, like it is the most natural thing in the world. There is a good chance they grew up during the dial-up era, that strange window of time when the internet existed, but hadn't swallowed everything yet. They're the ones who remember the sound, that weird mechanical screech your computer made while it tried to connect to the world through a phone line. They're your coworkers who somehow focus for hours without checking their phone, your friends who still prefer calling over texting, the ones who seem weirdly patient, and almost nobody talks about what is actually happening underneath. You know exactly who these people are, though. They're the friend who tells the worst story you've ever heard, and somehow makes it hilarious. It is 1997. You are maybe 10, 11 years old. School's out and your parents won't be home for another 3 hours. The house is empty. The television has maybe 40 channels and nothing's on. Your one friend is grounded and the other isn't picking up. No smartphone, no group chat, no algorithm serving you an endless feed of things to look at. So you just sit there. You read something. You draw. You stare at the ceiling and make up stories in your head for 45 minutes straight. And you don't think of it as meditation or mindfulness or whatever we'd brand it now. It is just Tuesday. Neuroscientist Mary Helen Immordino-Yang found that this kind of unstructured downtime activates what is called the default mode network in your brain. It is the system responsible for self-reflection, empathy, creative problem-solving, basically the machinery that builds your identity when nobody's watching. And dial-up kids activated that network constantly, not because they were disciplined, but because there was literally nothing else to do. Boredom was the default setting. Psychologists call it constructive boredom, the idea that when your brain has no external input, it doesn't shut down, it actually starts building. But in plain English, it just means they got really comfortable inside their own heads. And that comfort never went away, because humor activates the brain's reward system. When you make someone laugh, dopamine fires, even when the source material is your worst day. And here is what nobody tells you. There is a second mechanism running at the same time, something neuroscientists call the default mode network. You wanted to see a single image load on a web page, and you watched it render line by line from top to bottom, like a curtain opening. And if someone in your house picked up the phone, boom, connection gone, start the whole thing over, and you just accepted that. Researchers at Stanford found that early experiences with delayed gratification literally strengthen the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles impulse control. Dial-up kids didn't just wait because they chose to. They waited because the technology forced them to, and their brains adapted. And you can see it now. They're the ones who can wait in line without pulling out their phone. Waiting just doesn't bother them the way it bothers everyone else. And here is the thing nobody talks about. This patience came with a cost, because the world that shaped them disappeared almost overnight. One year you are waiting 20 minutes to load a web page. The next year everything is instant, always on, always demanding your attention. Psychologists call this an environmental mismatch, when the skills you developed for one world don't quite map onto the new one. But dial-up kids would probably just call it that weird feeling when you know you could survive without any of this, but can't quite escape it. You adapted to every platform shift, every economic crash, flexible because you had to be. But flexibility without stability isn't resilience, it is survival mode. There is this weird paradox, though. The quiet ones are often the best communicators in the room, and that sounds contradictory, but it is not. And that has given them something psychologists might call technological ambivalence, a deep appreciation for what the internet can do paired with instinctive distrust of what it has become. They'll build you an entire website but keep their own social media private. They'll teach their kids to code but limit screen time to 30 minutes. It is not hypocrisy. It is the difference between someone who saw fire invented and someone who was born into a world that was already burning. And this brings us to maybe the most important thing, the way dial-up kids handle connection, real human connection, not the digital kind. Because they grew up in this unique window where you had to actually be present to maintain a friendship. You couldn't just like a post and call it keeping in touch. You called them. You showed up at their house. You passed notes in class that took actual effort to write and deliver. Developmental psychologist Susan Pinker calls this the village effect, the idea that face-to-face interaction activates neurological pathways that digital communication can't replicate. In plain terms, being physically present with someone does things to your brain that a text message never will, no matter how many emojis you attach. And dial-up kids internalized that before they had any alternative, deep connection wasn't a lifestyle choice for them. It was just how things worked. But here is where it gets complicated. The world moved on, and now maintaining that kind of connection takes genuine effort. You can feel it in how they use social media, carefully, selectively, often with a slight sense that none of this is quite real. They'll post once a month, maybe less. But when they text you at 2 a.m. to ask if you are okay, they mean it, and they'll stay on the line. That is not a communication style. Psychologists might call it high-investment, low-frequency bonding, prioritizing depth over breadth in every relationship. But they'd probably just say they don't have the energy for people who aren't real with them. And honestly, that might be the healthiest boundary of all. And there is one more thing about this generation that nobody really names: the way they think about who they are. Because they built their identities before the internet could weigh in. No follower count, no like ratio, no public metric telling them how much they mattered. Their sense of self got assembled offline, piece by piece, through conversations and mistakes, and long afternoons figuring out what they actually liked. Psychologists call this intrinsic identity formation, building your self-concept from internal experience rather than external validation. In everyday terms, they know who they are without needing anyone to confirm it, and that is rarer than it sounds in a world that runs on approval metrics. And here is the quiet cost. That self-sufficiency can look a lot like distance, because when you don't need validation, people assume you don't need them. Every contingency plan, every extra week of prep is really someone asking, is it safe to show the world what I've got? Because here's what happens almost every single time. Morning comes, cortisol rises, the prefrontal cortex boots back up, the default mode network quiets down. They carry that everywhere. In the way they put their phone in another room when they're reading, in the way they can drive without needing a playlist, in the way they look at you when you are talking, really look at you, like they have all the time in the world. Because they remember when time actually felt like it moved slowly, and some part of them never stopped living at that speed. They're the bridge between two worlds, analog and digital, and they didn't get to choose which side to stand on. They just learned to live in both, carrying the quiet of one world into the noise of the other. And they don't talk about it much, because that is the other thing the dial-up era taught them. Not everything needs to be shared. Some things are better when they stay yours. Some knowledge is quieter than a post. Some connections don't need a like button to feel real. And in a world that gets louder every day, that might be the most radical thing a person can carry. The memory of what quiet felt like. Because remembering someone isn't a superpower, it is a wound that became a gift, and the least we can do is notice it back. Not with a grand gesture, just with a question they didn't have to ask for, just by remembering something small about them for once. It was your brain building itself into something the algorithm still can't quite reach. And honestly, that is worth more than any of us probably realize. If this hit home for you, if you felt something familiar in all of this, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. And if you want to help keep these deep dives going, hit that join button to become a channel member. It makes a bigger difference than you know. I would genuinely appreciate your support. Thanks for being here.